Welcome back to Love on the Rocks. Today we're taking another deep dive into the Suzanne Simpson case. You guys have been all over this one, so I wanted to make sure we got an update out for you. So, just a quick reminder, Brad Simpson's charged with the murder of his wife, Suzanne, who is still missing.
Right. And his attorney just requested what's called an examining trial.
I don't think we've ever really covered one of those on the show.
A typical thing, no. Not something you see requested very often.
So what is it? Is it like a mini trial before the actual trial?
Yeah, essentially. It's a chance for the defense to challenge whether there's even enough evidence to go to a grand jury.
So they could potentially get the case dismissed completely before it even really gets started.
That's the goal, at least. It's a risky move, though.
How so?
Well, the prosecution has to present some of their evidence, so the defense gets a preview of what they're up against.
I see. So it's kind of a gamble for both sides.
Exactly. High stakes, especially considering the evidence we have so far is almost entirely circumstantial.
No body, no murder weapon. Just a lot of little things that don't look great for Brad Simpson.
Right. So the prosecution has to build a narrative that connects all those dots and convinces the judge, or eventually a jury, that he's guilty.
What are they using as evidence?
A few things. First, there's the neighbor who says he saw an assault the night Suzanne disappeared, claims he saw Brad restraining her and heard screams.
Wow, that's pretty powerful testimony, if it holds up in court.
Could be, yeah. But eyewitness testimony can be shaky. The defense will definitely try to discredit him.
I bet. Make him sound unreliable or confused about what he saw.
Exactly. Then there's all of Brad Simpson's behavior after Suzanne vanished.
Yes, he was acting kind of suspicious.
Very suspicious. Witnesses saw him getting rid of large trash bags, a heavy-duty trash can, even something big wrapped in a blue tarp.
That's not good. Makes you wonder what he was trying to hide.
Right. The prosecution will say it's evidence he was trying to cover something up.
It makes sense. So it's like not just what he did, but when he did it. That makes it look worse.
Precisely. The timing is key. And then there are the weapons they found at his house.
Right? Didn't they find like a whole arsenal or something?
Not quite an arsenal, but an AK-47, not exactly something you keep around for home defense.
Definitely not. And as our listeners may recall, he was trying to get rid of it too.
Yeah. He allegedly asked a friend to help him hide it. So even if they can't directly link it to Suzanne's disappearance, it creates a certain image.
Makes him look dangerous. Someone capable of violence.
Exactly. The prosecution will definitely use that to their advantage.
So they're building a case that suggests a potential pattern of violence.
Trying to, yeah. But that can be tricky. They have to be careful not to go too far.
How so?
Well, they can't just imply that because he owns guns, he must have hurt his wife. They need more than that.
Right? Gotta connect those dots. Clearly. Now, you mentioned something before about a discovery request. What was that all about?
Oh, right. So that's basically where the defense asks for all the evidence the prosecution has against their client.
So they can see what they're up against.
Exactly. And in this case, it looks like they're planning to call a lot of witnesses.
Interesting. Makes me wonder who they are and what they might say. It could really shake things up.
It could. Definitely something to keep an eye on as the case develops. But it's not just witnesses. We also have Suzanne's past statements about abuse.
Right. She told her banker she was afraid of disappearing.
Yeah, and that Brad might be responsible.
But how much weight does something like that actually carry in court? I mean, the defense could argue she was just being dramatic.
They could try, but honestly, in cases like this, those past statements can be really important. If there's no body, it's harder to prove intent, right? But if they can show a history of abuse, it helps establish a motive.
Exactly. So even though it's not direct evidence of what happened, it contributes to the overall picture. And, juries tend to pay attention to that kind of thing.
They want to see the whole story, the whole relationship, to understand what might have happened.
Absolutely. It helps them make sense of the tragedy.
So even though we don't have a body or a murder weapon, the prosecution is trying to build this case based on the whole context.
Exactly. They're saying, look, he was violent in the past. She was afraid of him, and then she disappears. It all points to him. So this examining trial is going to be key in figuring out if they have a chance. It all hinges on whether the judge believes they have enough to move forward.
Absolutely. We're all on the edge of our seats waiting to see what happens.
I know I am. Now, before we move on to what might happen next, let's talk about something else that's been in the news. Some people have been comparing this case to the Casey Anthony trial, saying Brad Simpson might walk free just like she did.
It's an interesting comparison for sure. Both cases have a lot of circumstantial evidence, no body, and a husband who seems suspicious. But there are some key differences too.
Such as?
Well, in the Anthony case, they never really established a clear motive.
Yeah, I remember that. They tried to paint her as a party girl who didn't want to be a mom anymore.
Right, but they couldn't directly connect that to Kaylee's death.
But in this case, we have Suzanne's statements about being afraid.
Exactly. And that's huge. It gives the prosecution something to work with. They can say, look, she was afraid of him for a reason, and then she disappears.
It makes it harder for the defense to just say she ran off with someone else or something like that.
And the fact that Brad Simpson was getting rid of stuff right after she vanished, that's not a good look either.
So what are the prosecution's biggest challenges here? What do they need to overcome?
Well, first and foremost, they have to prove that Suzanne is actually dead.
But isn't that kind of obvious?
It might seem obvious to us, but legally, they can't just assume that.
So what do they have to do?
They need to present evidence that convinces a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that she's not alive somewhere.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, they could try to track her movements, show that she hasn't used her credit cards or contacted anyone. They could bring in experts to talk about the likelihood of someone disappearing without a trace.
So they're building a case based on the absence of evidence. That's kind of weird.
It is, yeah. But sometimes that's all you have. And then on top of proving she's dead, they have to prove that Brad did it. And they have to do it in a way that eliminates all other possibilities.
That's a tough job. So let's say the judge agrees to this examining trial. What happens if they don't think there's enough evidence?
Well, it doesn't automatically dismiss the charges, but it's a big setback for the prosecution.
So they could still try to go after him, even if they lose this examining trial.
Potentially, yeah. They could keep investigating, try to find more evidence, maybe even try to bring the case to a different grand jury later.
So even if Brad Simpson wins this round, it might not be over.
Not necessarily. This is just one step in a long process.
It's wild how much legal maneuvering goes on behind the scenes. I bet most people don't even realize all this is happening.
It's true. The public only sees a small fraction of what's actually going on in these cases.
Let's get back to the examining trial itself. It's basically like a mini trial, right?
Exactly. It's like a preliminary hearing to weed out weak cases before they go any further.
So what kind of evidence are we likely to see presented? Will they bring out the big guns right away, or will they hold some stuff back?
It's hard to say for sure, but I'd expect the prosecution to focus on the strongest parts of their case.
Like the neighbor who claims he saw the assault.
Definitely. That's a key piece of their puzzle. They'll probably also bring in people who can talk about Brad's suspicious behavior after Suzanne's disappearance.
Like the people who saw him throwing stuff away.
Exactly. And they might introduce some evidence about the weapons, especially the AK-47.
Trying to create that image of him as dangerous and capable of violence.
Exactly. They're trying to build a narrative, a story that makes sense to the judge.
And the defense will try to tear that narrative apart.
You bet. They'll challenge the reliability of the witnesses, try to cast doubt on the evidence, and offer alternative explanations for everything.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. But even if the judge sides with the prosecution, this case is far from over.
Oh yeah, this is just the first hurdle.
So even if they get past the examining trial, what happens next?
Well, then it goes to a grand jury.
Which is like what a bigger group of people who decide if there's enough evidence for a real trial.
Exactly. And they only need to find probable cause, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So the bar is still lower than it will be at an actual trial.
Okay, so let's say the grand jury decides there is enough evidence. What then?
Then Brad Simpson is officially indicted, and the case moves forward to trial.
Trial, where, he could still be found not guilty.
Right, exactly. Just because he's indicted doesn't mean he's automatically guilty. It just means the state thinks they have a strong enough case to take to a jury.
So basically, we're still in the very early stages of this whole thing.
We are. This could drag on for months, maybe even years.
And who knows what other twists and turns might happen along the way.
Right. You never know what new evidence might come to light or what kind of legal maneuvering might take place.
It's definitely a case that keeps you on your toes. But at the end of the day, this is about a woman who is missing and a family who wants answers.
Absolutely. And hopefully, as the case progresses, we'll start to get some of those answered.
You can continue to count on us to keep close tabs on the latest developments in the Suzanne Simpson case. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so we can bring you further developments regarding this case and the other cases we are currently tracking. And please like this video. It helps us in our efforts to bring you these tragic yet mesmerizing true life stories.